Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Hi, everyone. This is Karen W.
And this is Brenda J. Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
So on today's podcast, we have Celestia Tracy.
And we have Nancy Galassini-Gunn,
author, illustrator, and guides for Explore, A Guided Journey to Being Loved. If you're familiar with Mending the Soul, this is a more abbreviated journal and art format to go through. Celestia leads us through a healing journey, and Nancy illustrates through her amazing artwork and personal reflections. Celestia and her husband, Steve, founded Mending the Soul, a Christian nonprofit dedicated to resourcing, training, and supporting leaders worldwide to address abuse and injustice in their communities. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, welcome to the show. Hi, this is Brenda J. How are you both doing today?
We are doing
very
great.
well.
Yeah. Good.
Excited to be here.
Continuing with part 2 of Explore, A Guided Journey to Being Loved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So you say researchers have documented the long-term emotional and physical damage created by abuse, and you name 4 different things. 1 is hyperarousal, which you just mentioned, 2 intrusion, 3 emotional numbing, and 4 powerlessness. Do you want to expound on any of those?
Sure. Understanding these 4 primary effects of abuse and how they show up in our life is some of the most important work we can do. As you understand these effects of trauma, the question changes from what's wrong with me to what happened to me. Self-blame and self-loathing begin to transition into self-understanding, and self-understanding in time produces self-compassion. This is how toxic shame is healed. Scientists tell us that traumatic events cause physical changes in our bodies, particularly in our brain and nervous system. For some people, these brain changes and the resulting trauma symptoms will lessen with time. But for others, the trauma memory replays consciously and unconsciously, creating more and more emotional and physical stress. When stress symptoms continue over time, this can lead to a debilitating anxiety condition called post-traumatic stress response. And it's normal for abuse survivors to feel crazy because of the effects of trauma. They're not logical. They're not intuitive. They are impossible to understand without being helped to do so. Simply stated, the effects of trauma are normal responses to abnormal, painful events. Whether we admit it or not, trauma affects each of us, leaving internal evidence like muddy footprints when it's unresolved. On page 86 in Explore, you'll find a trauma exercise that includes a checklist for the most common symptoms you are experiencing in each of these 4 categories. And I'll share just a few of these now that come out of the research and out of my work with survivors. Hyperarousal, we've already talked about, but it shows up as increasingly intense anxiety. Symptoms might include nausea, increased blood pressure, rushing heart rate, dizziness, panic attacks, insomnia, fatigue, irritability, shutting down, inability to make decisions, and overreacting to situations that trigger body memories. Intrusion is when we experience distressing memories that keep popping up in the form of nightmares at night or flashbacks during the day. Those symptoms might include intrusive thoughts that disrupt daily life, feeling highly distracted, night terrors, nightmares, flashbacks, body memories, such as body memory that comes in the form of a flashback when touched a certain way or you smell a certain particular scent. Emotional numbing is the third category, and that happens internally when you shut down all feelings, and externally when you have a reduced responsiveness to the world. Symptoms might include experiencing a powerful desire not to feel, suicidal thoughts, suicidal actions, using food, drugs, alcohol, screen time, or busyness, or even religion to comfort ourselves, feeling intense anger or rage, pulling away from one's inner self, disassociating, becoming highly religious as a buffer to pain, disconnected from physical pain or reduced pain tolerance. And there's many more symptoms that are in Explore. And then powerlessness is the feeling of having no voice or ability to choose. And real powerlessness in childhood that comes out of abuse or neglect, abandonment, produces perceived powerlessness in adulthood. And there's a whole list of symptoms, again, in Explore that are related to that category of effect. But I think, Nancy, it might be helpful if you want to talk about some of the pieces and examples of that out of your story.
I can think of a couple that are obviously on the list that you just mentioned. I have a copy of a beautiful family picture. I have 3 lovely, healthy children. I'm in my favorite new sweater with jewelry on, and my husband is standing behind us, and we took this family portrait. So it's a little snap in time. But if you looked behind the portrait, what you would see is a family that was really struggling. I think the children were doing fairly well. But for that portrait, I had a rash all over my body. It didn't show in the portrait, thankfully, but it was just from stress. I was overwhelmed and had been overwhelmed for a long time, and I broke out all over. And that actually happened a couple times during the 7 years or so that I lived with an abuser. And I was starting a new job one day, and I'm sitting in orientation. And remember, I'm a nurse. And all of a sudden, I feel my heart rate go up to like 180. I'm short of breath. My chest gets tight. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, do I need to go to ER? I was in my 40s and had no risk factors. And I thought, nope, this is just stress. I just found out that I needed to go back to work full time to take care of the family because my husband could no longer work. And I did some quiet breathing and settled myself down, and the symptoms went away. But the hyperarousal is really, really difficult to manage. And I'm sure there were many times I was overwhelmed and I didn't even identify it. Just those two stand out to me.
Yeah, those are very vivid examples.
Yeah. Like just feeling like you're in fight or flight mode.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm more emotional numbing person for sure. I really struggle I feel some emotions, but not a lot. And when I try to feel and go deep, I resist it. Like, I don't want to feel anything. Yeah. So
what's healthy is, Brenda, you're aware of that. You have that self-awareness of where you go when stress gets a little too high. And that's fruit of working on your story, knowing your story, and doing some healing, is you have that deeper awareness.
yeah.
When I catch myself praying and I go into autopilot, I'm like, for Pete's sake, what's going on? Like, I keep trying to pray and I feel myself floating. That is a trigger for me to recognize I need a little more connection with the Lord and with myself, because I am losing connection with my mind, my heart, my body. And that's the gift that comes in healing. Healing doesn't make all these symptoms go away, but we know what they are. We know why they come, and we know what we need, and we're empowered to do something about it for ourselves.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
It is.
Well, in Explore, you have a lesson on reenactment and explain that children that experience trauma and are powerless to stop it grow into adults who may act powerless, even though they are not actually powerless anymore. You say adult victims of childhood trauma and neglect reenact their abuse and or neglect over and over in relationships. Because this behavior doesn't give the trauma survivor the healthy sense of mastery or power they desire, they engage in increasingly destructive forms of behavior. They don't understand why they are doing these dangerous or destructive things. They're just strongly compelled. This explains why women or men can't chronically fall for partners who neglect or abuse them. You say it is necessary to face your pain to gain victory over this, to call the pain by name, which is one way Explore can help. Can you share about how your body will tell you where to start with this?
Yes. In Explore, in this particular section, we have some expressive art prompts and some reflective questions that will be very helpful in getting you started, and a lot of good voices from survivors, men, women, and of course, Nancy's voice. So we can talk just for a few minutes about it here. But as we discussed in the previous question, paying attention to your body, thoughts, and identifying your feelings is an important starting place. Your body is smart and it's constantly trying to tell you things. Are you tense or anxious or feel short of breath? It's about something important. Are you experiencing disruptions with sleep or appetite? If so, it's about something. Because your body doesn't have words to express itself, it speaks through your somatic or physical sensations. You can forget, block, or intellectualize the memory stored in your brain, but until you feel and express it, and through the expression, release it, your body will continue to push these memories up and out in confusing ways. It will continue to hold trauma until you choose to do the work of releasing it. In my first counseling office, I had a framed piece of art hanging where my clients and I would see it every day. And it read, "When your heart speaks, take good notes." We all need this reminder. Explore will guide you in expressive art exercises that will help you begin to make these connections.
Yeah. And another question I had, you kind of, I guess, have touched on that a little bit, but I know as I was reading over that, because I can see sometimes when I do trying to reenact something, and I was just wondering, I'm so curious about, human nature and why would we do that? I mean, why is it? Because like you're saying that it's something that hasn't been healed, it's our body's way of saying, no, pay attention to this. This is something that you still need to do work on.
It is confusing, Karen. I didn't really understand reenactment for a long time. I think my understanding of it has gelled because of our work, my work as a clinician, our work in facilitation, and then doing trainings and internationally. But it is a confusing and often misunderstood manifestation of powerlessness. And it helps to explain why traumatized people lead traumatized lives. Why often, I've heard people say when they hear about a battered woman that's in an abusive marriage, they will say, why doesn't she just leave? Well, It's not understanding the effects of trauma. Those 4 primary effects we talked about, powerlessness is one of those. And reenactment is a part of powerlessness because children are powerless to stop the abuse they experience. If they are not helped to heal, they grow into adults who may act powerlessly, even though they're not actually powerless anymore. And it's called learned helplessness. For these people, powerlessness is a learned response. Trauma victims can become addicted to abuse. Their response to abuse is to stimulate more of it, either as victim or as perpetrator. And Nancy, you gave an example of that came out of your Gary's childhood emotional neglect, and how he just reenacted that in marriage, which both of you were reenacting victimization and perpetrator together until that pattern was stopped. So look for patterns in your life. What is your behavior trying to tell you? Explore will give you prompts and reflections to help you know.
Interesting.
Well, you say early in the book that the first 3 years are the most important in shaping and forming you. Can you expound on that?
Definitely. On the day you were born, your first sources of pleasure were smell, touch, and sound. What you did or did not experience during your first 1,000 days of life has imprinted your brain and powerfully shaped your personality. Today, many of your longings and passions and even compulsions flow out of these early sensory experiences. And that, I just have to say, is a pretty fun. I mean, there's definitely a hard side of that when we know we have histories of abusive or missing parents and lots of abuse and neglect. But once you start moving through that, it becomes quite an adventure to pursue self-awareness in these things that you're just so passionate about in your sensory experiences. But this is because during the first 3 years, children are learning to trust their caregiver as well as their own ability to exert influence on their world. By 3 years of age, the child has either learned to trust or to distrust others based on his or her early experiences with their primary caregiver, which most of the time is a mom. If your first caregiver was warm, loving, and responsive to your cries of distress, their attunement to your needs helped you develop a basic sense of trust. This child is then being helped to develop a secure attachment with the first adult in its life, thus internalizing the smiling face of his or her mother or primary caregiver. This secure attachment will then make it easier for that child to trust others as a teen and early adult. And when I teach, I do a sketch of a child and then a sketch of the caregiver, whatever, if it's anger, if it's upset, if it's distraction, if it's rejection, the child swallows that face and carries that face inside until there's intervention and reparative attachment, secure attachment relationships are forged. And this is what happens in a positive way in Mending the Soul groups. A lot of ways, a Mending the Soul group, if it's well led and safe and the facilitators are well trained and they're following the resource, what happens is it's a bit like a reparative family. And you learn how to disagree and actually solve it. You experience these new experiences of being seen and heard and delighted in and pursued. And that God has built our brain. Bruce Perry tells us in his excellent developmental research on babies, God has made our brains in such a way that they are plastic. They can change. They can heal. So those early experiences, no matter how harrowing, can be healed in reparative relationships in a safe community. And we see this all the time in the Congo. And when I was working as a clinician in my office with 8 other clinicians that I was supervising and supporting, and I knew we were doing good quality, best practice work, I started spotting early on as a therapist and seeing that as hard as I worked with a client, I couldn't quite take them home in their healing. And it's because I was outside of relationship with them. And I began to see the potency and the potential of taking clients who had done their own work well, pairing them with others who were just beginning. And that was my kind of pilot to the Mending the Soul model as a therapist before we actually launched a small group recovery curriculum. And I saw my clients get better faster when they were doing this work in community with each other. They didn't need 3 years of therapy. They needed sometimes a 3-month group or several 3-month groups.
Yeah.
And that was exhilarating to see, and why in 2010 I walked away from my private practice to do MTS full time in community because I'm sold on it. Man, we see the miracles happen with it.
What I like what you said in your workbook, Explore, is that was fascinating to me the first 3 years of my life, because when you went back and asked us to write our memories of it, I can't remember it. And I know my mom, like she had a really, like I talked about this on a different podcast. When I was about a year to year and a half, I was a baby. I got passed around to different caretakers because she was in the hospital for over a month and she almost died. So even probably after she, got out, she probably didn't have the energy. So I really struggled with the abandonment, but I don't even have the memory. So I do like how you say in the book to just start asking people what your childhood was like if you can't remember yourself.
Yes.
So that's interesting. So I'm going to start asking people, where did I go? My mom told me a little bit, but maybe I need to start asking other people because I really don't know what happened during that time or who.
Definitely, because your body is remembering, but most of that was happening pre-verbal. So the memory is stored in your body through sensations, what you were drawn to or repelled against. And, I think asking others who were there, who knew you, is a wonderful thing to do. And with my oldest daughter who experienced, I was in the hospital for months at a time, every 6 months for her first 3 years of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as an adult, some of our closest family friends are some of the caregivers, the women who cared for her when I couldn't. And it has been very sweet for us as a family to include them as extended family. And it's helped her fill in some of those pieces to recognize, yes, she does have some attachment issues as a result of my body's collagen disorder, but God provided in these different ways. And today, my daughter takes in foster teens, has adopt children, has her third foster daughter. And that child is family for her, is spiritual family. And she puts her arms around everybody. Sometimes it's almost making me crazy. It's so extreme, but I think, wow, look what God did, right? He took brokenness in our family that did hurt her. It hurt me. And we have to still stay on it because of the disrupted attachment between the two of us. But, what God has done with that to turn her into the lover of all people, and all of those people are family, and her children has 50 aunties and uncles and cousins because of it. And it's so we must know our story, and then not just the bad, but look for, okay, where was God when we did, let me finish that statement, but where was God providing? How was he providing? If your mother's arms weren't around you, whose arms were?
Yeah.
Who fed you?
Yeah.
And you will discover so much about yourself as you begin to connect those dots. It'll make sense of seemingly little things around your preferences that now you'll have a story for.
Yeah. It may explain some of the disconnection too.
Yeah.
Yes. And your struggles. Yes. Your relational struggles. Yes, very much so. Struggles with shame or trying to, be perfect and not show, weak sides. Yeah. It just makes so many things make sense. And those people that love us and are safe in our life, they are the ones that need to understand that about our story.
Yeah.
And for us to understand it about their story.
This is good. This is good.
I had a question for you, Nancy, because you said you're a facilitator. How many groups have you facilitated with Mending the Soul?
I have never counted. Usually in a year, I can do no more than 2 though, because I find them, they take there's a lot of emotional draining that goes on for me during groups. So I space myself. And I'm looking at approaching my church and talking about starting an explore group. So that's in process.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'd like to do more facilitating, I think. I just think it is such good material. And I know when I had 2 facilitators and they had done it, I think they had gone through like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, a lot of groups. And I remember asking, because when they would share their story, they would still cry. And I'm like, does it ever like not hurt anymore? And she's like, it hurts less. She's like, the more you share your story and, it's like these, it's like an onion and it's like, okay, that layer was healed. And that was encouraging because you think, gosh, is it ever going to heal, but to see that it's less, but there's always going to be pain, in our lives because memories and things like that are painful, but to know that, and to me, using your pain and mending the soul, that's what gives you empathy, right? Is when the people that minister me the most is people that, they understood where I was coming from.
And I'm just jealous because you feel. And I think
yes.
I need to feel because it's hurting my physical health. It's hurting my physical health so badly.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Nice
Feeling,
cry. I'll cry for everyone else's story, but not my own. Like I'll get emotional. That really affected me. And then my own, it's like a whatever. Anyway,
I think you're starting to though.
Yeah, I think so.
Feeling is a gift. I think, let me just say one thing about attachment, reparative attachment that happens in these small groups. The mechanism for developing a secure attachment is the baby has a need. There's distress. It cries. Mom sees, hears, and responds. Baby cries. Mom responds with comfort. And that happens multiple times throughout the day. Well, think of reparative attachment in these Mending the Soul groups. Survivor expresses, like when she begins to tell her story, Brenda, like you're saying, she tells these really sad, these sad experiences without tears, maybe even with laughter. But the facilitator is trained and is connected herself with her own story so she can feel for the participant what the participant can't feel. And the tears in the group wake up the tears in the participant.
Yeah, they do.
Is it that true, Nancy?
That is absolutely true. When you see the pain you should be expressing on the faces of everyone around you in the group, you can see people begin to feel it for themselves.
Yeah. Wow.
It's such a gift. That kind of comfort is a sacrifice. It's compassion. That's true. Compassion is costly, and it's a costly gift. But what our facilitators tell us is every time they facilitate, they receive too.
Yeah.
And there's a little deeper level of healing. Yeah. Because we're doing that with each other. The bonding sequence of distress, comfort, distress, comfort.
Yeah. Have you found that to be true too, Nancy?
Yes. In fact, many of my groups stay in touch for a long time afterwards, and even have private Facebook groups that they stay on together.
That's great.
So that's their continued safe community, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't really, my group was really small and we unfortunately didn't stay in touch. Well, I think one of them I follow on Facebook, but we really didn't stay in touch. I wish we would have.
Well, we did.
Yeah, we did. I know. We're my roommate now. We shared this nonprofit together.
That's great.
I love this quote from Explore. Your best contribution to the world will come from your wounds. Go there and heal them, and you will help others do the same. Grieving your losses is a respectful and honest response to trauma, loss, shame, abuse, and exploitation. Try it, and you will find that pain sits close to joy and that hope is on the other side. I love that quote. Anything you want to add to that?
Nancy, is there anything you would like to add?
You know, when I look back at the confusion and pain that I was in, I feel compelled, now that I'm on the other side of that, to reach a hand out to help others out of their dark places.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think as I look back on the pain and then the healing is I am so glad my faith did not fail during that time when I was in an abusive marriage and even afterwards. There was never a disconnect between God and I.
Yeah.
And there was this following passion to go help others, like reach a hand down to someone else that was in the dark places and pull them up.
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. I totally relate to that.
Well, we've talked. Oh, did you want to say anything?
I was just going to say one thing that facilitators speak of, and I know Steve and I feel this strongly. Only God can transform pain into power. And it's the power to love like Jesus loves. It's what people in the United States are desperate to see right now in our spiritual communities. Real, gritty, messy love. And the only path into that kind of an experience with Jesus, so that we've received that love from him, that belovedness, is through pain. And I just love how God redeems suffering in the world by using suffering to be his vehicle to experience his presence and deeper intimacy with him than we could ever know any other way. God will never, ever, ever waste our pain.
Yeah.
And that just makes you just fall head over heels in love with Jesus more every day. And you follow what people will ask us, like, why do you keep going back to the Congo? Well, we do, to find Jesus there. And we do. The deeper the suffering, when you are there offering comfort in a connected way in Jesus' name, you feel closer to him than you will ever feel sitting in a brick and mortar church.
Yeah.
And it's where he is. And we know that because of the cross.
Yeah. He's close to the brokenhearted.
Yep.
Well, we've talked about the importance of lament on our podcast before, but this quote from Explore is so good. Lament gives you a template for containing and expressing pain healthily and productively. Lament is the path that eventually leads to healing and hope, which is true freedom. How can truly expressing our pain and wrestle with God helps us find more peace? Wait, how can truly expressing our pain and wrestling with God help us find more peace?
I will say that what I love about lamenting, is its honesty. I have learned to take my pain and loss to a God who truly, truly cares. God walks close to me in lament. I can feel his side-by-side presence, and it has always been that way for me. So when I am grieving and lamenting, I feel God walking close, his comfort, his concern, his attention, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that language, Nancy. And again, just carrying our attachment theory forward, think of what lament is. I mean, real biblical lament, which is honest, unfiltered, unedited, raw, right? So it's our honesty, our distress, however that shows up, our true self in this cry of distress. And what does God do? He's near, he shows us himself, and he comforts us. And that's the healing mechanism that's happening over and over and over again until we don't know in our head that God loves us. But in our heart, we know that we are adored by our true Father, who calls us truly his beloved. And there is nothing like that. And the only way there to that joy and hope and freedom is through. And it's what makes me I just talk a tiny bit about my story and Explore, but it's what makes me so thankful now for my story of this body that's broken in these weird, invisible ways and won't heal, and connective tissue that doesn't function properly, and crazy autoimmune cycling. I'm so thankful for it now because it pinned me down, and I just had myself and all of my misery and all of my anger and God. And it's where he taught me to get real and honest with him.
Yeah.
And so again, if we think about attachment, that's all lament is. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Distress, comfort, distress, comfort.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I loved all the pictures that you painted, Nancy. My favorites, and there were several of them in there, but I love the stapled stitch and buttoned, the mighty oak and the healing tree. But I love those are my three top favorites.
Awesome.
Can you share more about your inspirations for those, or anything that you'd want us to share about the art that you produce for Explore?
Well, it's funny that stapled, stitched, and buttoned is your favorite because it has the best backstory.
To be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 3 of Explore, a guided journey to being loved.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.